Okay. Mix it up. If you're joining live, say hi. I can't see on Facebook who is joining live, so just say hi. And I'm just gonna get everything set up, wait for a few more people in case someone wants to join still, and get my notes up here. Awesome. Cool. Yeah, so if you're watching this live, say hi. If you're watching this as a replay, just hashtag replay and say hi. And yeah, let me know if you have any comments, any questions as we go, anything that resonates with you, sharing your own experiences around anything we talk about. It's all helpful. And yeah, we can all kind of see that, okay, other people struggle with this too. And I promise you, in a group of women clinicians, you are not alone in your boundary struggles. It is something that is very common and in different ways, right? Some of us will be at the stage of like, what boundary? Like, never heard of it in my life. And other people are like, yeah, I have boundaries, but sometimes I struggle with this aspect of it, or I can set it very well with these people, but not other people, right? There are different levels of struggles with boundaries, but I can assure you that whatever you're struggling with when it comes to boundaries, you are not alone. So just to introduce myself while I'm waiting, I'm Sarah, health and recovery coach for women clinicians, and boundaries, as I said, huge topic. We can all relate to it. So I'm really excited to be talking about boundaries today. And I want to start with a few signs that you might be struggling with boundaries. So sometimes we don't necessarily come with like, I'm struggling with boundaries, right? But there are other symptoms of it that we can start to recognize, like, oh, this might be a boundary problem. So just type in relate if these are any that you relate to. So maybe you are feeling exhausted, tired, overwhelmed. Maybe you feel overcommitted, like you've just said yes to everything and you're struggling to like, where is this going to fit in my schedule, right? I'm already like, every little second is accounted for and I'm trying to like do the logistics of like, where can this fit in? Sorry, I just realized it's kind of dark. I'm going to just make it brighter. So yeah, overcommitted, time poor, right? So you don't have time for any like additional thing, or you just feel like always rushed, always like yeah, having no spaciousness in your schedule. Time poor, overcommitted. You might feel frustrated and resentful, especially when it comes to like helping people or doing things for people. Maybe you say things like, can they not see like how busy I am? Or maybe you get frustrated when people are not grateful for what you do and what you give. So frustration, resentment. There's also this aspect of reactivity. So almost feeling like, the best way I can describe it is almost like you are the supporting role for other people, right? So you don't feel like you're in the driver's seat of your life. You feel like you're reacting to whatever other people want from you, say to you. You're trying to keep people happy, keep people pleased, not disappointed with you. You're trying to say yes to any like request of you. You feel like that's your role, right? You almost just reacting to other people's needs instead of having your own needs, your own driving, your own life, your own little boat, right? So these are just some of the symptoms. There can be so many, but these can be little signs to tell you like maybe boundaries is something that you can work on. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So I want to just start with a little bit of like a mental exercise. So I want you to imagine a boundary that you would like to set. It can be very small, it can be very big. If you're not sure, like, what does that even mean to have to set a boundary, right? Where would you like to, where would you like a situation to be different? You can just think of it like that, right? And it's in relation to another person, right? There's another person involved, and you would like this situation to be different in some way, shape, or form. Let's imagine that you're setting that boundary, like picture that in your mind. You're asking for that thing, or you're saying the thing. We'll talk about the difference between requests and boundaries in a second. But just for now, just very generally, just having that conversation with the other person about what you need, what you would like, what you'd want to be different. What is the main fear? What is the like, or the resistance, or like, I cannot do that, no way. Like, what is the biggest feeling of resistance? And just type that into the comments. I'd love to hear that. Like, what is the, either like an emotional response that comes up, like, I would feel this, maybe I'm scared of XYZ happening, maybe you just have this like visceral yuck that you can't describe, or like maybe this version of identity, like, I can't do that, like, I've never been that person, that's not who I am, I don't set boundaries, I have never set boundaries. What is that like? What comes up for you when you imagine setting a boundary in your life? And just share that in the comments. I'll just give you a minute. So just anything that like comes up for you when you think about, I'm going to set this boundary with this person, and like, yeah, what comes up emotionally or thought-wise or anxiety about something happening. So I'm just going to mention a few common ones that come up. So sometimes it's more like I was saying now, like, I don't even know, sometimes we don't even know whether there is a boundary to set, like, is this even a boundary or is this something else? How do I know whether I want to set a boundary? We might be just saying, like, I just don't even know where to start. Like, I've never set a boundary. I don't know what to say. I don't know how I would put it. Like, where do I start, kind of thing. One of the other fears is like, I'm scared of hurting the other person. I'm scared of them being upset by it, hurt by it, angered by it, disappointed by it, right? I'm worried about a certain reaction in the other person. And kind of linked to that is, I don't think that I can handle the discomfort of what that other person is feeling, right? Sometimes we are more worried that we're hurting them and we're worried about their well-being, but sometimes we're also worried about our discomfort at seeing that, right? Like, seeing their reaction and like feeling so uncomfortable because we cause that that kind of emotional reaction in them, right? Sometimes we're worried about hurting the actual relationship. Like, if I do this, whether that's with a patient or a person, like in your private life, right? Like, something about the relationship is going to be hurt. Like, for example, with a patient, they're going to stop being my patient, or with someone in your personal life, like maybe it's your partner and you're scared, like, this is going to damage the relationship, or they're going to want to leave me. Or a friend, they're not going to be wanting to be friends with me. This is going to damage the relationship if I set this boundary. And then there's this other kind of category of like, I'm not sure if I am allowed to set this boundary. And this can come in different forms, right? Like, sometimes it's about the relationship itself, like the context. Like, for example, with a patient, you can have this sort of like, well, they're a patient, they're paying for the service. Like, in this relationship, I'm not sure if I can actually set boundaries. Like, is that allowed in some way, right? Or maybe it's with your boss and you're thinking like, I don't know if I'm allowed to set boundaries with my boss. Like, is that allowed? Sometimes it can be more of like a worthiness thing. And this is what Lauren also alluded to in her question about boundaries, of like, I don't honor essentially my own boundaries or my boundaries with myself. And that leads me to think like, then am I allowed to set a boundary with someone else if I'm not even keeping the boundaries with myself, right? There's some aspects of like worthiness, or like, is conditionality a word? Anyway, it's conditional, right? So like, only when I have XYZ sorted out, then I'm allowed to set boundaries. Like, maybe it's something like I have to have like the perfect words, or I have to have thought about it from every angle, or that's the one that I have to like really have thought this through, and like it has to be justified, and it has to be like really well thought out, and I have to like know that it's a legitimate thing, right? Or like some aspects of like, I'm not good enough in this relationship to set that boundary, like some kind of idea of hierarchy. So there can be many ways that that shows up, but in some sense, you're asking like, am I even allowed to set this boundary? So those are kind of common things that come up. There are others, but those are some of the main ones that can come up when we think about setting a boundary. So we're going to go into each one of these a little bit more, but especially like today, I'm just trying to kind of touch on like every aspect of boundaries, like the basics of each aspect. And then we can always go deeper into one of these areas depending on feedback and what you guys are struggling with as well. So we're just going to touch on a little bit of each of these. But I want to just bring up a few concepts that will kind of address a lot of these questions and concerns and all of that. So I want you to just think of boundaries as like a physical like separation between physical and psychological separation between you and the other person. Like, the whole idea of a boundary is that we as two people are two separate entities. I am here with my personality, my thoughts, my beliefs, my expectations, my learned behaviors, all of that, emotional and behavioral learned responses, right? I am an entity, and you are a separate entity. You have your own thoughts, your own beliefs, your own expectations, your own learned behaviors, etc., right? And just that idea of like, you are two separate entities, that covers a lot of what we think about when we think about boundaries, right? Because if I am separate to you, I then am not responsible for your emotional state. Okay, I am not responsible for your emotions, meaning I do not have to fix your emotional state. I don't have to make sure you don't feel this way or that way. I'm not trying to manage your emotional state or reactions or whatever. You are entitled to your own emotional landscape. That is not my responsibility to manage. And not only is it not my responsibility to manage, but I'm actually overstepping that boundary when I meddle in your emotional life and think like, I can manage this, I can manipulate it, I can control it, right? Like, I am going to behave and speak in a way that makes you feel a certain kind of emotion because I'm trying to control your emotional state. Okay, so when we are thinking about boundaries and we are two separate entities, we are no longer trying to control the emotional state of the other person. The reverse of that is you are not responsible for my emotions, right? So I don't see it as like, if you are uncomfortable, that means I have to be uncomfortable. Well, that means I have to be uncomfortable. So if you are upset, that means I have to be upset, right? If you are angry, that means I have to feel a certain way about that anger, right? Your emotional state means something to my emotional state. And this is not about not caring, right? This is about not being one entity. We're not being enmeshed. We're not being codependent on each other. We are two separate entities. And from that place, we can actually care about each other even more. We can have a truly authentic relationship because we're not trying to control and manipulate each other's emotional states and take responsibility for them. There's something else I was going to say about that. But anyway, so you are two separate entities. So that was part of it. Like if you're not responsible for their emotional state, you then don't have to, like one of the questions of like, if I set this, they're going to be upset. And if you're not trying to control that, if that's not your responsibility, then you can start to learn to say, they are going to have an emotional reaction to this. They are entitled to their own emotions. And that doesn't have to mean anything about whether I set this boundary or not, right? They don't have to understand it. They don't have to give me acceptance and validation for this in order for me to be able to set the boundary. So the other concept that I want to, that is related to that is talking about that idea of like, it's not about being mean or unkind or controlling other people's states. So when you are setting a boundary, it is essentially a way to protect your own emotional, psychological, physical well-being, right? So if you are protected, you are safe, you can actually give to someone more and more sustainably and actually joyfully. You can actually want to give. It can be a joyful giving instead of this like resentful, frustrated giving, or a giving that is just unsustainable. If you keep giving that way, you are going to burn out, right? So we are finding a compassion, finding a giving that is actually sustainable, but also we are including ourselves in the people that we care about, right? So in the people that we are compassionate towards and giving towards and kind towards, we are now also one of those people. So we are just including ourselves in our care. Because often when we are not setting boundaries, we just don't include ourselves, right? We say like, I just need to give to other people, or I just need to be there for other people, or I need to help them. But we don't do that to ourselves. So it's just about including ourselves in that care. But when we are two separate entities, I can actually be more compassionate towards you, right? Think about how compassionate and kind and genuinely giving you can be to someone when you feel like they're taking advantage of you, or that you are responsible for them, or that they are entitled to something from you. That is a very different kind of relationship. So it's actually about protecting yourself, but also about protecting your ability to give joyfully and to actually be present in a relationship with someone else. It's about preserving that connection, right? So think about like a really good friend. And I say to her, like, this is how I would like you to treat me, right? That is improving our connection, right? So the alternative would be like, I just ignore the fact that I was uncomfortable, or I ghost her, or I just keep going as normal, but there's like something offish about me, right? That is the alternative to not having that conversation. But that is not the one that is going to foster more connection, right? Having that conversation and saying like, this is what bothered me. Can we do this differently? Or I'd like you to do this, or whatever it is. And that is actually to preserve that connection, to have a deeper relationship. So just changing the way that we think about it. And not having boundaries is very closely related to people-pleasing type behaviors. And I just want to like touch on people-pleasing a little bit as well. It is not actually about pleasing people, it's about protection. So we, at some point in our journey, learned that it was not safe to have needs of our own. It was not safe to express those needs. We learned along the way that it is our role to keep the peace, It is our role to keep people happy, that we are responsible for other people's emotional state. Somewhere along the way, we learned that it was not safe to do things like setting boundaries. So I just want you to have compassion for yourself in this journey and think of it as like, if I learned that protective behavior, it's going to feel very scary if I just suddenly start like setting a boundary, and often that will backfire because you set this huge, big boundary, and then it was so outside of your comfort level that you were so uncomfortable from that. And you go like, see, I can't set boundaries, or like, see what happens when I set boundaries, right? You need to take small steps because you are slowly starting to show yourself that it's safe. It's safe to have needs. It's safe to express those needs. People are not going to leave you. People are not going to just exit that relationship because you set that boundary, right? But also learning to tolerate the discomfort of other people's emotional states. So I'm going to touch on each one of those, but just those two big ideas of you are two separate entities, and that is what boundaries is about. And then secondly, that it is a protective state. Things like people pleasing or just saying yes to everything compulsively, it's all about protection. So the first one is just about the not knowing where to start, not knowing what to say, right? And like I said, we can almost have this identity of like, I just don't set boundaries. Like, that's just not the kind of person I am, right? And I love to say, like, it's not a personality trait. I say this to my boyfriend all the time. You're such a messy person. And I'm like, it's not a personality trait. Okay. Maybe I should change it to like genetic or something, because I don't think personality traits are necessarily the most fixed things about you. But it's just like a way to sometimes remind yourself, like, it's not your whole identity, right? Just because you have always been the person that kept the peace, that was the helper, that never said no, that kept people happy, right? Just because you've always been that person does not mean that it is now, that is your destiny forever, right? I genuinely remember thinking that that was just my role in life. Like, I couldn't, like, it was just impossible to be anything different, right? So just knowing that it's a skill, I think, can sometimes help. It's something that you can learn. It's something that you can gradually get better and better and better at. But I just want to make the point that, like, when we are learning the skills of boundary setting, I think we can sometimes fall into this trap of like, I want to learn how to set a boundary that no one is ever going to be upset by, right? We almost want to like guarantee a perfect outcome. Like, how do I set a boundary and make sure that the other person isn't upset, isn't angry, isn't disappointed or whatever, right? So I just want to make the point that, like, we're not learning how to set boundaries to avoid the discomfort of that is unavoidable. There are ways that we can say it in a kinder way. And one of the ways is just not waiting until it's so bad that you literally can't anymore. You have this like blow up, explosive, ask me how I know type of experience, right? So that is one way that we can do it in a more kind way, is not wait until it is like this huge thing. We do it, we can learn how to do it earlier and earlier. But also just realizing that anything about communication, about vulnerability with others, about forging better connections, we are always going to be doing things that are messy. That is just the result of being a human being, right? I love on Brene Brown's website, she says, keep it kind, awkward, and brave. That is how our communication, how our interactions are. Sometimes they're messy, sometimes they are so awkward, sometimes we are fumbling over words, right? I think sometimes when we want to learn the skill of a certain kind of communication, we want it to be perfect. We want to not have to stumble over our words. We want it to like not do anything embarrassing. We want it to be like very well thought out. Sometimes we almost like over formal because we're trying to protect ourselves from that, like dear so and so, you know. And sometimes we can just say like, this is so awkward for me to say this, but I really need to tell you this, or this is really hard for me. I'm not used to saying this, but I need to tell you about this, right? Like we can be honest about the fact that it's hard for us. We can be honest about the fact that it's awkward. And then thinking about boundaries as like, we're just trying to state like what we accept and what we don't accept, what we are willing and not willing to tolerate. And sometimes that doesn't need to be external. Sometimes that can just be internal and saying to ourselves, like, I am not going to accept XYZ behavior. Or if someone talks to me for a certain amount of time and I am starting to feel tired and exhausted, I am not going to force myself to stay in that situation. So sometimes it's more, sure, Bran, thank you. I'll try. I have no idea how to do that, but I will make it shareable. Where was I? Sorry. I think I may have ADHD. Anyway, so internal boundaries of like, I am not going to tolerate XYZ. And sometimes it is external, right? Sometimes it's a statement to someone else. And then we come to the difference between a request or a boundary or an ultimatum. So a request is the place where we can always start. It's just a request, like, please, can you not say that thing? Or please, can you not ask me to do something when I've already told you that I can't? Or please, can you take the rubbish out when you said you would? Like sometimes it's a request, right? So we're just requesting someone to change their behavior or do something. But we need to make sure that we are separating that from an actual boundary. And boundary is about your actions. A boundary is about, this is what I'm going to do if you do that. So if you do XYZ, I'm going to do this, meaning we can always enforce our own boundaries. And then an ultimatum can be very similar to a boundary, but it's all about the intention. So an ultimatum is not about preserving that connection and that relationship with the other person, right? It's about like getting your way. It's about like, I'm trying to make you do what I want to do. So an ultimatum, like, if you don't do XYZ, I'm going to do this, but it's in a way of like, I'm trying to get my way, not necessarily trying to preserve the relationship. Okay. So then going on to like fear of hurting the other person or doing something that's wrong or selfish. I think like one of the ironies of this is like, we are trying so hard to make sure the other person is comfortable and make sure the other person is not hurt or rejected or disappointed, that we do the exact same thing to ourselves. We disappoint ourselves. We reject ourselves. We abandon ourselves and our needs and our wants, and we make it that it's not important. So I want to just differentiate between hurting and harming. So sometimes our actions, our requests, our boundaries, through no fault of our own, sometimes that is going to hurt another human being. Sometimes they are going to be upset. Sometimes they're going to be angry. Sometimes they are going to be disappointed. And we need to learn the resilience of learning how to tolerate that and learning how to sit with that discomfort that someone else is feeling that way. But it is not harming them. What is harming is if you pretend you don't have any needs, you have these inauthentic connections, you denying what you need for your own well-being, that is going to harm you in the long term. So sometimes we are almost trying to avoid short-term discomfort of the other person at the cost of long-term harm to us, to our well-being. And also just our sense of self and our sense of trusting ourselves, right? If you feel like if someone comes up against you and you're just going to abandon yourself, that does not lead to better kind of self-trust. And like your self-concept gets degraded every time that you do that for other people. So yeah, handling the discomfort, building resilience, building courage to have other people, let other people be responsible for their own emotions, and not trying to go in and try and meddle and no, but you need to like be okay with my boundary, right? You need to be happy, and you need to understand, and you need to validate me, and you need to accept me. So the whole idea of like, am I allowed to set this boundary? If something makes you uncomfortable, you are allowed to set that boundary. Okay, it doesn't matter what that relationship is. It doesn't matter what the perceived hierarchy is. Nothing. You don't have to. There's no extra condition that needs to happen for you to be able to set a boundary. There might be consequences to you setting your boundary, right? But you are always like, there's no, like I always think about like, where will you go to answer that question? So for example, if someone says like, am I allowed to say to my husband that he needs to do X, Y, Z, or that am I allowed to request that? Like, is that even allowed? Like, where are you going to go to find that information, right? There is no like all-knowing rule book where we can go and look that up, right? Like, go and look at the index of like, this is the problem and this is the person I want to talk to. Like, am I allowed to do that, right? So this is part of that journey of like learning that self-trust and learning like, if it makes me uncomfortable, I'm going to honor my needs and I'm going to set that boundary. And being willing for someone else to disagree with your boundary and think that you weren't allowed to set it and be upset with it. One of the things you can also think about is like, if people have a lot of pushback, a lot of like questioning, a lot of like being really upset that you set a boundary with them, it is probably a sign that that boundary really needed to be set. It's not a sign that something went wrong or that you are wrong, that you are bad, that you weren't supposed to set that boundary, etc. Nothing has gone wrong. Okay. Sometimes it's just a confirmation for you, like, oh yeah, this is a boundary that needed to be set. Okay, so I'm just going to wrap up with a little story. So, just a story of like how I navigated this. So, like, if there's one struggle that I have had the majority of my life and continue to have, is this idea of like people-pleasing behavior and feeling like I was responsible for other people's emotional state, completely pretending that I do not have needs in relationships, and not being able to express those needs. And I used to spend a lot of time thinking about how can I stop caring as much what other people think? Or how can I care less if people judge me? Or how can I be less affected by other people's emotional states? And it wasn't particularly helpful. Like often this is like a trend in behavior change in general. Like it's much more difficult to not do something or to avoid doing something. It's much easier to go towards something or to start doing something or to add something that we're doing. So in this scenario, I like to describe it as like, rather than trying to care less what other people thought, I just tried to care more and more what I thought. So instead of like, almost like, this is how big other people are in my mind, and this is how big I am, and I'm just trying to have that slowly get bigger and bigger and bigger, and have myself. Did I raise my own hand? I don't even know. I just saw like a raised hand, but I'm the only one on the Zoom call. That was very weird. Okay. If you are watching live and you have a question, just pop it in the Facebook thing. I don't know how that worked. Anyway, so almost just like, instead of caring less what other people think, I'm caring what I think about myself more. I'm caring about how I judge myself. I'm caring about what I think about myself. I'm caring about whether I'm in integrity with myself. I'm caring about, what I believe about myself, how I see myself, all those kinds of things. I'm trying to get that bigger, and that starts to level it out, almost like, now it's starting to just be on the same plane. And at least I found, like, the more I focused on that, the more I naturally started doing things more authentically. I started to naturally set boundaries. I started to naturally talk to people when something was bothering me or whatever it is. Like, I became less concerned about others' opinions and judgments, etc. Not because I was actively trying to care less about that, but because I was caring about the other stuff more and more. So building my own self-concept, building my own like what I thought about myself. So if it's helpful, you're welcome to use that idea. So yeah, so I think that was everything I wanted to say about boundaries. But let me know if there's anything specific that you guys want to go a little bit kind of deeper into, anything that resonated with you today, anything that you feel you'd like more help with. And I'm also going to just put my link to the mini coaching sessions in this live. And I want each person watching this live to book a mini coaching session and say, this is the boundary that I'm struggling with, like X boundary, the little block that says, like, what do you want to dive into, right? And you just say boundary, and we will talk about a specific boundary that you are struggling with. And we'll just go through like all the thoughts and emotions that come up when thinking about this, and what your beliefs and assumptions might be around boundaries, but then also to give you an action step that you can take. And for some people, there's going to be a very small action step, and it might have nothing to do with other people. So it's just going to be internal. It's going to be a journaling exercise or something that you can do by yourself, because it might not feel safe to do it with other people. For other people, like I said, we are at different stages of this, right? For someone else, it might be like, I'm very comfortable setting boundaries in this situation, but in this situation, I have this kind of struggle, right? It can be different for each person. So we're always going to pick something that feels safe for you and doable, and you're really willing and able to do. But please book a session with that. Let's get all of us kind of just one step closer with our boundaries, because I know that it's something that we all struggle with, and it makes total sense that we struggle with it. But I think we can all learn that skill. We can all get better at it, and we can all keep doing things kindly and awkwardly and bravely. Thank you so much, guys, and have a wonderful Sunday. I will chat to you guys soon.